Houston, we've had a problem. Immortal words that come to mind when we recall the events of Apollo 13. In that same thought, we also remember that this was a defining moment for NASA in our country. Good evening. I'm Dr. Ed Powers, retired NASA flight surgeon and the current director of the Aerospace Medicine Division at UTMB Health, the sponsor of tonight's Thought Leader Lecture, remembering the flight of Apollo 13. We're honored to be here with you. The courage and tenacity of the crew of Apollo 13 have come to symbolize the resilience of NASA and America's space exploration. At UTMB, we're privileged to work closely with NASA and its commercial and international partners to provide pre-flight medical clearance for space travelers. UTMB's role in ensuring the health of NASA astronauts and in training the next generation of aerospace medicine physicians is one we take very seriously. For us, failure is never an option. Tonight, as we look back on the bravery and ingenuity that epitomized Apollo 13, let us also take a moment to ponder and celebrate the years for NASA and space exploration. As our friend Gene Kranz said over half a century ago, we must make it happen. UTMB Health is grateful to share in tonight's commemoration of Apollo 13. We hope you enjoy the presentation.
Apollo 13 launched April 11, 1970, with mission commander Jim Lovell, command module pilot Jack Swigert, and lunar module pilot Fred Haise. 2 days into a 3-day journey to the lunar surface, disaster struck.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. Houston, we've had a problem.
A malfunction in an oxygen tank caused the service module to rupture, losing 2 of the 3 fuel cells and venting oxygen into space. Without electricity, the astronauts were cold and quickly running out of water and breathable air. The work of countless individuals in mission control and all through Johnson Space Center kept that problem from becoming a disaster. Rising carbon dioxide levels could have proven fatal to the 3 astronauts. A team of engineers at Mission Control designed a new CO2 scrubber from spare parts inside the spacecraft, literally fitting a square peg into a round hole. Everyone at Mission Control worked around the clock, constantly innovating, never giving up, and kept the astronauts alive. Through all the challenges and difficulties, they succeeded. The entire world held its breath until Lovell, Swigert, and Haise splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on April 17, 1970. Through ingenuity, intelligence, and unparalleled teamwork, NASA turned tragedy into triumph.
What an inspiring video for today's special panel discussion, Apollo 13 Mission Memories. Hello, I'm William T. Harris, President and CEO here at Space Center Houston. Thank you for joining Space Center Houston to celebrate Apollo 13 mission with a full day of lunar experiences on the 51st anniversary of the crew's splashdown day after a safe return to Earth. With our program, we are so excited to have you here today. I'd like to call to the podium Mark Geyer, Director of NASA Johnson Space Center, to provide a special welcome remarks. Mark.
Thank you, William, and thank you for having this incredible event today. You know, it's an honor to be here. I did want to mention the beauty of Space Center Houston is you have a functioning facility here that talks about space, and it's right next to a space center that is flying humans every day in space. This month alone, we'll have 2 launches to the International Space Station and 2 landings. Every week this month, we're having a launch or a landing. We just had a landing last night. Cape Rubens and her Russian counterparts landed on the steppes of Kazakhstan, and we have a launch of another Dragon then later this week. So a lot is happening every day. But it is my honor today to introduce a tribute video to Glenn Lunny. Glenn Lunny was one of the founding members of the flight control team and was a big part of Apollo 13 as well. Of course, Glenn passed away in March. He had the call sign of Black Flight. That was his call sign. He was selected in the class of 1963 with John Hodge and Gene Kranz, and he was the 4th flight director. He was a lead flight director for 2 Gemini missions, 10 and 12, and was a flight director for 9 and 11 as well. He was a flight director for Apollo 11 landing and was a lead flight director for Apollo 7, which was the first human launch on an Apollo system, and also Apollo 10, which was the dress rehearsal. He took a leadership role in the Apollo-Soyuz test program, which, as you remember, led the way for our international cooperation on the International Space Station, which we are flying today, and actually now we've had 20 continuous years with Americans in space on the International Space Station. Glenn also played a key role in the space shuttle program. He retired from NASA in '85, but continued to participate and have key leadership roles in private industry with Rockwell and then USA until he retired in 1995. But clearly one of his most notable events was actually Apollo 13 that we're talking about today. During his shift, his team is recognized of having innovated and worked with the astronauts to deliberately shut down key command module systems so that the lunar module could be used as a lifeboat for the crew during the journey home. In Glenn's own words that he gave us in his NASA oral history, Glenn said, "I felt that the black team shift immediately after the explosion and for the next 14 hours was the best piece of operations work I ever did or could hope to do. It posed a continuous demand for the best decisions, often without hard data, and mostly on the basis of judgment in the face of the most severe in-flight emergency faced so far in manned spaceflight. There might have been a better solution, but it is still not apparent what it would be. Perhaps we could have been a little quicker at times, but we were consciously deliberate." That's just a great example of Glenn's leadership and the incredible work that he did. You know, I had the honor of going to Glenn's visitation before his funeral, and his wife Marilyn mentioned that not only Glenn was, of course, committed to human spaceflight, but one of the things he often did was he made sure that the bachelors and single folks that were part of his team were invited to dinners, holiday events, just to make sure, just another great example of how Glenn worked hard to make sure his team was taken care of. So I never worked for Glenn or with Glenn while he was at NASA, but after he retired, we interacted on several occasions as we talked about NASA's future. And while he was one of the most famous NASA alumni, he was actually one of the most humble people that I've ever worked with. He listened, he very much listened to understand our constraints, and then he would gently suggest or give examples of things that worked for him. It was awesome. He was a very gracious person overall, and we're all going to miss him. So please enjoy this short video recognizing Glenn's service. Thank you.
We all knew each other, we all were comfortable with who could do what and so on. So there you are, we pulled that off.
What a wonderful tribute. Thank you so much, Mark. We're dedicating today's panel in honor and memory of Glenn Lenny, who will live on in posterity for his role as an Apollo flight director. Space Center Houston is a nonprofit science center that's a dynamic science and space exploration learning destination. We're also, as Mark said, the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center, where we focus on the story of human space exploration, past, present, and future. We attract more than 1.25 million visitors annually, both through virtual and on-site programs. Through panel discussions like today and other special programming, we provide access to space experts on human space exploration. Our aim is to make science and learning about space exploration accessible to everyone and also fun. We are thrilled to honor the Apollo program and its historic feats. The lessons we've learned have enabled further advances in exploration and are informing plans for a return of humans to the moon through the Artemis program in the coming years. Space Center Houston has many Apollo-era exhibits and experiences you can experience here for yourself, including our newly installed one-of-a-kind 7-foot bronze statue depicting Apollo 13 astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Haise. The Apollo 13 sculpture is the center's newest addition to Rocket Park as part of its NASA Tram Tour experience, where we have a Saturn V rocket. We'll take you back in time to relive the excitement of the Apollo era with our spring special exhibit, Apollo When We Went to the Moon. And you can take an in-depth guided experience of Space Center Houston on our new Space Expert Tour. Very soon, fingers crossed, we anticipate a resumption of tours to experience the restored Mission Operations Control Room, where the Apollo missions were managed, including Apollo 13. We're here today to honor the Apollo 13 mission and the people behind it. The Apollo 13 mission launched April 11, 1970, and it was to be the first mission to land at the lunar highlands and mark the third crewed mission to land on the moon. However, the lunar landing was aborted after an oxygen tank in the service module failed 2 days into the mission, and we're all familiar with what happened in the following days. People from around the world held their breaths in suspense, joined in prayer and positive thoughts in hope of bringing the astronauts safely back to Earth. On April 17, 1970, the crew of Apollo 13 safely landed after a near tragedy in space. With innovative thinking, the support team at Mission Control engineered a solution to return the crew home safely. The Apollo 13 mission symbolizes the power of teamwork and how creative problem-solving drives innovation. And today, I am honored these astronauts and the flight directors who brought them home safely, Apollo 13 astronauts Fred Haise and Jim Lovell, and Apollo-era flight directors Gerry Griffin, Kranz, and Milton Windler are with us. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists, and then we're going to have a conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. Captain Lovell was selected as an astronaut by NASA in September 1962. He served as backup pilot for the Gemini 4 flight, pilot for Gemini 7, backup commander for Gemini 9, commander of Gemini 12, command module pilot in Apollo 8 mission, and backup commander to Neil Armstrong for Apollo 11 lunar landing mission. He completed his 4th mission as a spacecraft commander in the Apollo 13 flight. Apollo 11 through 17th, 1970, he became the first man to journey twice to the moon. Captain Lovell holds a total of 750 hours and 5 minutes in space. Fred Haise was one of the 19 astronauts selected by NASA in April 1966. He served as a backup lunar module pilot for Apollo 8 and 11 missions and backup spacecraft commander for Apollo 16 mission. Haise was the lunar module pilot in Apollo 13 and has logged 142 hours and 54 minutes in space. He supported the Space Shuttle Orbiter project and was commander of one of the crews, who piloted the Space Shuttle's approach and landing test flights. Mr. Gerry Griffin is the former director of NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. His career in the United States space program began in 1960 and has included senior positions in government and industry. At NASA, in addition to his position as director of Johnson Space Center, he also served as deputy director of the John F. Kennedy Space Center in Florida and the Hugh F. Dryden Flight Research Center in California. During NASA's Apollo program, Mr. Griffin was a flight director in mission control and served in this capacity for all of the Apollo crewed missions. He was lead flight director for 3 lunar landing missions, Apollo 12, 15, and 17. During the flight of Apollo 13, Mr. Griffin was scheduled to lead the lunar landing team in mission control. When the landing was canceled after the oxygen tank explosion, he led one of the teams of flight controllers who were responsible for the safe return of the astronauts. Mr. Milton Windler was a jet fighter pilot and began working at NASA in 1959 during Project Mercury. He was one of the 4 flight directors of Apollo 13 mission operations team. He also served as flight director for Apollo 8, Apollo 10, Apollo 11, Apollo 14, Apollo 15, and all 3 Skylab missions. Following the conclusion of the Apollo program, Mr. Windler worked in the Space Shuttle Project Office on remote manipulative systems operations until 1978. Our final panelist, Mr. Kranz, joined the NASA task group at Langley, Virginia in 1960 and was assigned the position of Assistant Flight Director for Project Mercury. He assumed flight director duties for all Project Gemini missions and was branch chief for flight control operations. He was selected as division chief for flight control in 1968 and continued his duties as a flight director for Apollo 11, lunar landing before taking over the leadership of the Apollo 13 Tiger team. During the Apollo 17 mission, the last mission to the moon, Kranz wore an iconic red, white, and blue vest, which you can see in our Starship Gallery at Space Center Houston, thanks to his wife, Marta. We love that vest, Gene. So the fun part, now our conversation begins. I'm going to transition over here to the chair so that we can have a conversation about the experiences of these extraordinary individuals. Okay. So oh good, we transitioned over to my lavalier. Terrific. Well, I want to begin with Mr. Lovell. Jim Lovell, we are so happy to have you back here at Space Center Houston. I'm curious, and I'd love for the reaction of the other panelists. You had an opportunity to see the sculpture today, and I'm curious what your reaction was when you stepped into Rocket Park and saw that for the first time.
Well, I was quite amazed. I heard about this statue being made, and I thought that this was a statue really for the results of the type of work that the Space Center Houston does. It brings the people together, cooperation and working together, the flight crew, the mission control people, and the aerospace industry that is supporting the mission control people if there's an accident, which was, of course, on 13. So I was really pretty happy to see the results of the statue bringing those aspects together.
Wonderful. Fred, what was your reaction when you saw the sculpture for the first time in person?
Well, the scene itself is very appropriate for the flight. Unfortunately, many of our test objectives on Apollo 13 we did not accomplish, the primary one landing on the moon, but obviously the crescendo ending was our splashdown that we, through a lot of trauma and beaten challenges, managed to get us home. So it was appropriate to seeing be a buzz on board the carrier now coming off onto the Iwo Jima. And it's also reflective of being here of the, what Jim mentioned, the strong tie of mission control and others working together to ensure we got home.
Well, I'm curious from the flight directors, from Gerry, Milton, and Gene, because you were in mission control, I think, at the time the astronauts were successfully rescued. What memories did it bring back for you when you saw the sculpture today?
Well, it was a good reminder of a very successful finish to Apollo 13, and we, it was a long, hard 3.5, 4 days for us, but it was no harder on us than it was on the crew, who about froze to death. And but it showed, it's been mentioned already, the teamwork between the astronauts and mission control, and then this giant support network. We were just the tip of the iceberg, the astronauts and mission control. The big strength was underneath us with the industry, with other NASA centers, and with one we sometimes leave out, the Department of Defense, who provided the recovery forces that we kind of ran around in the Pacific there for a little bit before we decided where to put them down. So the statue's good. It symbolizes the end of a very tough road that we plowed pretty well.
Wonderful. Milt, what were your impressions?
I beg your pardon, say that again.
Oh, what memories came back to you when you saw the sculpture today?
The statues?
Yes.
Well, of course, I was reminded of when the crew actually happened. And I think Jim is quoted on the signs that go along with that exhibit over there that said he didn't really feel like he was really safe until he stepped foot on the carrier, which I've always agreed with. We tend to say as soon as we see the parachutes open, we say, hey, we're done. But
there's a few things to do to get by between the parachute opening and getting the crew safe on board. And I used to work in recovery, and I guess I appreciate that pretty much. And maybe not as much as Jim did, since he's an old carrier pilot. But in any event, I thought that that exhibit over there captured the spirit of the real conclusion and the triumph of the mission, and I liked it.
Gene, what were your impressions when you saw it, the sculpture?
Actually, when I saw that, when I've seen the statues today, I think of the very human victory that was accomplished by the teams in mission control and the various contractor teams we had. I think of the 4 teams of the flight directors, 3 of which were doing routine work, keeping the mission going, working with the crew. Basically, the team I had some great leaders there. I had John Aaron, who basically managed all the resources, Arnie Aldrich, who pulled all the procedures we had together, Bill Peters, who provided the oversight, astronauts who would go off and run these procedures in the simulators. So I think about the integration of these various people that now we're getting help and assistance from Crew Systems Division to address the carbon dioxide problem, people that were really, how do we navigate, how do we verify the integrity of our navigation system? And it was really people learned by doing. Everything that went into the development of a mission was produced by the controllers themselves. And I think that this mission indicated that it was a successful way of doing business.
Something that everyone talks about with Apollo 13 is the extraordinary teamwork and the innovation that took place. So I'm curious to the flight directors, how did you nurture that in your team? Because you recruited very young engineers to be part of mission control, and they accomplished extraordinary things. What are some of the things that you did to help nurture that excellence and that innovation among your teams?
Well, I think it starts at the top. We were fortunate in Apollo to have great leadership. When you have guys like Bob Gilruth and Chris Kraft, and later Gene Kranz, running an effort that was difficult. We were a bunch of young people, mostly. Flight directors were some of the oldest people in the control center, and I think when I became a flight director, I was 33, and we were some of the older people in the room. We had 20-year-olds in there, 20-something-year-olds, fresh out of college. And so they were melded in using the model that the guys actually started clear back in Mercury. And it became obvious that if you were going to succeed in mission control, you joined the team. We had no loners. There was nobody out on the fringes. So it was kind of a natural thing for us. We got started right. Never had been done this task of going and landing somewhere other than Earth. And so it was kind of I think a model for the future. And that style of teamwork and combined with leadership carried us on into the shuttle. And so I think we hit on something there 50 years ago that was kind of unique and a little bit of serendipity and, a little bit of guys that knew what they were doing. So I think the teamwork was the key.
And Milt, do you have thoughts to add to that about how did you build your team and ensure innovation and creativity?
I don't know, the word innovation, I guess, is a good thing, but guys in the flight control positions had already considered just about everything, I think, that we're talking about. The famous lithium hydroxide canister change, I guess, had not been discovered, but the concept, and they knew it was going to be required, and they knew that they had to work with whatever was on board the ship. So that kind of thing, I think, just naturally came to the top in many areas.
I think one of the challenges that we stepped up to was to establish a consistent culture within the teams in mission control. At the conclusion of the Apollo program, Flight Director Pete Frank wrote a document that we call the Foundations, which was basically a value statement that we would pass on to the generations that followed us. It talked about discipline, morale, it talked about toughness, competence, commitment, teamwork. This document called the Foundations is in all of our conference rooms, et cetera. And in fact, it even continues today within the ranks of the mission control teams. After the Columbia accident, they took and added the word basically to address the fact that we had an accident, we had the responsibilities, we should be vigilant. They added vigilance. And there's a statement that fits all the young people coming in to always be aware that suddenly and unexpectedly you may find yourselves in a position where your performance has ultimate consequences. And I think this was true of every man and woman that was in mission control the day the crew of Apollo 13 called down and said, "Hey, Houston, we got a problem."
That's phenomenal, because I know that there are many lessons learned from Apollo that still apply today and are being used as we prepare to return astronauts to the moon. And I know that there is, of course, the phrase, Gene, you used, tough and competent, which is really important, right? That you're really dedicated. And I know there's another element of working through to a solution, right, with your team, that you never give up, that there are always going to be challenges and you have to work through those. So how did you keep your teams really focused on working toward a solution with Apollo 13?
Well, I think the key was that I basically had a series of what I'd say people that were out within the various organizations with open ears. They were listening to anybody that had any idea on how we might bring this mission to a successful conclusion, bring the crew back home. And as I said before, I had people with basically the mandate to integrate the procedures. I had all the astronauts over in the simulators who would call in. They'd be exercising the procedures we developed. We had basically former graduates of Space Task Group up in Canada coming in and feeding answers into us. So it was really a question of these people almost in an intuitive sense, through the process of developing our mission rules, discussing how we would accommodate issues during the course of the mission, and then through the training process, developed what I'd say the risk decision maturity to recognize when a solution was needed, what were the elements of that solution, how soon did it have to be implemented, and then go out and find the answers.
I wanted to switch back to talking to Jim and Fred about being an astronaut is a very dangerous job. There are a lot of risks. How did you prepare your families when you were getting ready to launch on a mission?
Well, this was my fourth mission. Consequently, I got kind of used to the countdown for the mission, but of course Apollo was always touch and go, but I was very comfortable. What about you, Fred?
Yeah, I had been in the airplane test environment for 7 years. I was a test pilot for NASA for 7 years before I joined the astronaut program. So the thought of tragedy possible was not new. I discussed some elements of the mission and what were maybe the most risky with my wife. Beyond that, which was kind of traditional, at least in Marine Corps and squadrons I was in, you had a designee, and I picked Gerry Carr. He was a neighbor, he was a fellow Marine, and I had Gerry to the house and show him where insurance papers were, and he was my designee to take care of the family, primarily. Obviously, I knew there'd be other astronauts, friends, that would show up and also be willing to aid, as well as NASA. But Gerry was the key person that was going to take care of the family should I not get back.
It's really admirable to see all of you with your families because you're so close with your children and grandchildren. It's really admirable. So it's clear you have good communication with all of them. What words of advice do you have for the Artemis astronauts, the astronauts who are preparing to go to the moon? What would you suggest to them that they say to their children and spouses as they prepare to take on these dangerous missions?
Well, I think that any astronauts that are going to the moon and have a family, and I think they should bring the family together and tell them exactly what we're going to do, tell them what the problems are going to be, but tell them how we're going to do various things to go there, and also convince them of the reliability of the machine that they're working with, and that we have a group behind in mission control that will help them if there's any problems that are required on the mission, but have a positive attitude. You can't go to the moon thinking all the time that there's going to be an explosion or something like that, or you'd never go to the moon. And so I think you have to say to yourself that this is going to be a successful flight, everything's going to work fine, I have a fine crew, and I have a backup group that in case something happens, they can help work it out.
Yeah, one other thing, the NASA provided in the home a speaker, so the family and anyone else visiting could listen to all the air-to-ground all the time through that speaker. NASA also had a protocol officer they assigned, unlike the movie. It was kind of cast him in the wrong way, but they were there to do literally any way to support the wife and the family during that time. They answer phones, go get groceries, whatever, answer the door, whatever was needed. NASA had an official there. In fact, in the case of my flight, Mr. Bouch, who was the director of Stennis Space Center, sent 3 engineers. They worked 3 shifts. Midnight shift had to sleep on my mother's sofa, but he sent 3 engineers to my house in Mississippi to stay with her because of the circumstances of Apollo 13. So, that kind of help was there all the time, and I know, as I said, people during the flight, of course. Mary had a lot of people there, other astronauts, astronaut wives in particular, that were there to help her. She was pregnant at the time.
I think we also had on board, didn't we, Fred? At least I had it in my bedroom at home. My wife could listen to our conversation between Houston and the spacecraft. So that was very comfortable for a while, at least on 13.
I was going to say it probably got scary, as opposed to being reassuring after a while. Well, I'm curious from the flight directors, what are some thoughts or lessons learned for you that you want to share to flight directors who are going to be leading the missions back to the moon? Are there some insights or things that you would encourage them to pay attention to think about? I know it was new. You were the first ever to command missions to the moon. No one had ever done it before, so there was a lot of learning. But you amassed a lot of knowledge on the many missions that went to the moon. Are there some takeaways that you would want to be sure that current flight directors are aware of as they guide missions to the moon?
Well, I've actually talked to some of the flight directors and spent some time with Holly Ridings, the head of the flight director office, talking exactly what you're talking about, what kind of advice for the future. And I think the thing I focused on more than anything is the preparedness. You can't be over-prepared for this business. As Jim and Fred both alluded to, it's a risky business. There's inherent risk, and it's always a question of risk versus gain. And obviously, we side on the side that the gain is worth it. You can bear the risk. But the flight directors and the other people in mission control have got a tremendous responsibility. And you accept that, or or you don't. And if you don't, you're not in mission control. So I think the flight directors of the future are going to have the same things that we deal with. I've told them operating at lunar distances is different than Earth orbit. Don't think it's just cranking. And so for one thing, you can't get them home for 3 or 4 days like we did with Apollo 13. You can't get them down in a matter of hours like you can from low Earth orbit. So you've got to think differently. You've got to plan particularly your malfunction procedures when you do have one of these problems. Every flight had problems, by the way. There was no flight that was problem-free. But you learn how to handle those. And one of the things that amazed me about, amaze is not the right word, but in 13, when we had the explosion, Gene's team had the chaos of trying to figure out what was going on. By the time Glenn got there, it was obvious we were going to have to get into the command service, or the lunar module, and use it as a lifeboat and hold the CSM for entry. It shook up our whole team's schedules and everything we were trying to do. But the teams, it was almost seamless. We went to an entirely different mode of operation. And I think that came through years of teamwork and working with each other. But we made that change easily, much easier than I thought it might be. And so I told Holly that you've got to build that kind of structure so that you can react to an event that you had not planned at all, that you really hadn't trained for exactly. But I thought it was pretty seamless the way we went into this mode. We had Gene kind of offline trying to figure out what was going on, what got us there. And then, as he said, the rest of us were continuing to monitor consumables. I have to say something right there, too. This guy sitting just to the left of me, Fred Haise, was doing his own calculation of consumables. And at the end of the mission, we compared what he did versus what all of us did on the ground, and you could almost lay them on top of each other. So you did a great job, Fred. And he pretty well knew where everything was without us telling him. But I think the teams of the future are going to have very much the same thing that we faced. And they got to think about it.
Yeah. No, except I didn't think of the lithium hydroxide. That was the most critical. And I had, I had us only down to 12 amps. I think y'all got us down to about 18 amps, and y'all got us down to 12 and a half.
And I think we had 6 hours of water, and you were closer to the real number, which I think was 16 hours remaining.
There was one innovation that I thought was really great from the center there. We had to know our attitude with respect to the celestial sphere so that we can make maneuvers. Now, we're making maneuvers from the lunar module, not the command module. And then we came up, or mission control came up, with the guidance system maybe, to use the Earth's terminator, that line between the daylight and darkness, and to put my optics on the terminator, which would then give the mission control a position of our attitude with respect to the celestial sphere, and therefore they could then determine what maneuvers we had to make to get back on course or do other things that were necessary.
I think I understood that. But
I happened to be on duty when we did that, and it was such a critical check that I think actually Fred looked into the AOT, and you could see the sun, which was all it took. But I was so nervous when I looked at my notes in the flight log afterwards, I couldn't read them. It was so critical, because if we had not had a good alignment, we had a lot of work to do to get them back. So anyway, it was a neat time. But I keep saying the flight directors going back to the moon, they're going to learn the same thing, innovate.
Innovate, great. Milt or Gene, do you have thoughts about things you learned from the Apollo program that you would like the Artemis flight controllers and flight directors to know that will help them on their missions?
Well, I'd go back to, I spent 3 years in flight test at McDonnell. One of my first bosses was a guy by the name of Harry Carroll, and he flew 37 missions over the Romanian oil fields, Plosti, and then he did up north. And he said, Gene, as a flight test engineer, what you want to do is you want to treat every mission as if it was your first mission. And that means the same intensity, the same intention, the same preparation for every mission you ever fly, just like you did the first time. That would be my message to the next generation.
I think that we were really fortunate in Apollo because we had a lot of resources. We talk about these 400,000 people that were helping us, and it was billions of dollars involved, trillions maybe in today's money. We're probably not going to have that luxury in the future. I see SpaceX kind of putting their regular computers on temporary tables, and they're able to do what they have to do in a very good fashion. I don't know what's going to happen if they get into a Apollo 13 type situation where they have to worry about saving the crew and things like that, but it would seem like that you have to really learn to do more with fewer resources, which I think they're doing. It's amazing to me how the program is carried on with SpaceX and these other things going on. And I don't know what you could say that's a lesson that I learned in Apollo 13, but I hope it ought to be the other way around. You can't say that, well, Apollo 13 required all these 100, 200,000, 300,000 people, and we got to do that with 50 or 100 or whatever it is. And that's going to be the secret. We were really fortunate in Apollo. We had a lot of resources, unlimited, I guess.
Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we're reaching the end of our time. It feels like we just started our conversation. But I want to thank you all for joining us today and being part of the recognition of the new sculpture here at Space Center Houston commemorating the Apollo 13 mission. I know through our education programs and public programs at Space Center Houston, the public is still very passionate and interested in Apollo 13 and the lessons learned. And we absolutely know that it's informing plans, or the current practices, but also plans for the future as we return to the moon. So I want to, again, thank all of our panelists who are here today, our commander, Jim Lovell, pilot Fred Haise, and former flight directors Gerry Griffin, Milton Windler, and Gene Kranz. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
At NASA, we have always answered the innate call to go.
With Artemis,
we are going to stay.
Proving that humanity
can live on the moon,
Mars,
and other worlds,
and share the wonders of the solar system with all.
Our story is one of people.
All those who make this journey possible.
From advocates across communities,
to companies across industries,
to countries around the world,
we achieve
this collective endeavor.
Our efforts create impact for all.
Technologies that revolutionize industries.
And jobs that bring prosperity to people.
The discoveries from space
benefit the way we live on Earth today.
And those from the moon
will create a better future
for generations to come.
But to do that,
we must go.
Hi, I'm Kjell Lindgren.
My name is Raja Chari.
Kayla Barron.
Kate Rubens.
Hi, I'm Christina Cook.
NASA astronaut Joe Akaba.
Jessica Amir,
Woody Hoberg.
Ann McClain.
Stephanie Wilson,
My name is Johnny Kim.
Nicole Mann.
Victor Glover.
Jessica Watkins.
Hi, I'm Matthew Dominic.
Jasmine Mogbelli.
Frank Rubio,
Scott Tingle.
this is what we do. This is what we will do.
Let's go.
We go to the moon to learn how to live on other planets.
For the benefit of all.
Hello, I'm William T. Harris, President and CEO of Space Center Houston. We're a dynamic science and space exploration learning destination, and we're also a nonprofit science center that serves as the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center. We share the story of human space exploration, past, present, and future, with more than 1.25 million annual visitors, both virtually and in person. Thank you for joining Space Center Houston to celebrate the Apollo 13 mission with a full day of lunar experiences on the 51st anniversary of the crew's safe return to Earth and Splashdown Day. Throughout our programming, we're going to be live streaming special panel discussions and providing access to space experts advancing human space exploration. Space Center Houston makes science and learning about space exploration accessible to everyone. We're thrilled to honor the Apollo program and its historic feats, enabling us to return humans to the moon in the next few years. And speaking of returning humans to the moon, I'm absolutely delighted with our panel today that features two current astronauts and the current head of the Flight Controller's Office. We're going to actually have an interesting conversation about preparing to send astronauts back to the moon, but also the current rigors and preparations for being an astronaut and being a flight controller. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today. We have Dr. Kjell Lindgren, who was selected by NASA in 2009. He holds a doctorate of medicine from the University of Colorado. He's a board-certified emergency and aerospace medicine doctor. After serving as deputy crew surgeon for STS-130 and Expedition 24, he was selected as an astronaut in June 2009 as one of 14 members of the 20th NASA astronaut class. Dr. Lindgren flew on Expedition 44-45 and logged 141 days in space. He participated in 2 spacewalks and in more than 100 different scientific experiments. Currently, Dr. Lindgren was selected as one of the Artemis class of astronauts to support NASA's future mission to the moon. And also, Kjell is an active volunteer at Space Center Houston, and we're really thrilled with all that he does to engage the public around space exploration. Captain Stephen Bowen was the first submarine officer to be selected as an astronaut by NASA. Bowen is a veteran of STS-126, STS-132, and STS-133. The STS-126 mission was the 27th International Space Station Assembly mission. The crew delivered equipment and supplies, as well as expanded living quarters to house 6-member crews aboard ISS. STS-132 delivered an integrated cargo carrier and a Russian mini research module. STS-133 delivered the permanent multi-purpose module and the 4th express logistics carrier to the station. He's logged more than 40 days in space, including 47 hours and 18 minutes and 7 spacewalks. Holly Riding serves as Chief Flight Director, making her the first woman to lead the elite group that directs human spaceflight missions from the Mission Control Center at NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. Holly manages the group of 32 active flight directors and flight controllers in training who oversee a variety of human spaceflight programs. We are so delighted to have all of you here with us today and looking forward to having a conversation with you about what's currently involved in preparing astronauts for space. So I thought if we could begin perhaps with Stephen and Kjell and talk a little bit about what you currently do to prepare for a space mission.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having us on this panel today. It's such a privilege to be celebrating the 51st anniversary of Apollo 13's successful return to the Earth and all of the important things that that entails. It's truly a milestone in human spaceflight and definitely worthy of celebration. Stephen and I are actively engaged in training right now. I'm currently serving, or I'm currently in training for next mission to the International Space Station as a part of Expedition 67, flying on a SpaceX Dragon. And so as a part of that training, we continue to do the very important things that we need to prepare for space flight, and that is spacewalk preparation, using the robotic arm, flying in the T-38, using it as our space flight readiness trainer, and having that opportunity to work with the crew on good communication and resource management. We continue to train on space station systems, and as we're getting ready for our Dragon flights, training on the systems of that vehicle as well. So we stay very busy, but such a privilege to serve in this capacity and to work with the larger NASA team and our international partners as well.
Kjell, how your training and use of technology has changed, because in talking to the Apollo astronauts, they were a lot of kind of buttons and switches, right? And it was much more manual in terms of the things that they had to do to direct spacecraft. But now it seems you almost need to be an expert in information technology to understand how systems work. How is that training evolving for you?
Some things never change, right? I mean, our spacewalk training or EVA training, it's evolved a lot. We've got the incredible facilities now, the MBL. We have the virtual VR lab for additional training that you really can't get in the NBL. As Kjell said, we have a lot of training that is just the same. T-38s, I think we're still flying the exact same aircraft we flew before. As a matter of fact, we have pictures on the wall in the astronaut office of some of those crew members actually flying into the same T-38s we're flying in. So some things never change. Actually, one of the more specific things that came about directly from Apollo 13 that we carry on is sort of in-flight maintenance. The fact that we had to do a repair on orbit that really required understanding exactly what capabilities you had on board and what you can do with them. We had on Space Shuttle the IFM books that would guide you through specific known repairs, but nothing ever fails the way you expect. So just by going through those exercises and looking at what things might fail, and on Space Station we have a discipline, the OSOS, who's an acronym I can no longer remember what it stands for. I'm sure Holly knows off the top of her head. I'll put her on the spot here in a moment. But they develop these repairs and procedures that allow us to continue to operate Space Station almost on a weekly basis. We're running something off normal. Something broke, some small thing, some big thing, and that having that ability already built in to understand what you have on board and what you can get done, the direct result of Apollo 13. And I don't think we would be nearly as functional today if we didn't have that capability. So I'll let Holly explain what OSO stands for.
Operations Support Officer.
That's it.
You have to oversee the team that is flying the International Space Station currently in Leo, but now preparations are underway for Artemis to return astronauts to the moon. How is training evolving for flight controllers, and how do you balance between the current duties of taking care of the astronauts on ISS while preparing for a future architecture and program going back to the moon?
Right, that's a lot of questions wrapped into one monologue, William. So let's start with the training, right? So when you put together any training program, you have to consider, what you're trying to accomplish, right? So if you think about the Apollo missions to the moon, they built up that capability just like we are today with Artemis, right? Artemis 1, uncrewed test flight. Then you've got Artemis 2 with the crew. Then you're going to get around the moon. Then you're going to figure out our new NRHO, our orbit around the moon that we're planning on using. And so our training sort of mirrors that process, just like it did in Apollo. And you don't learn how to run a marathon in a day, right? You figure out how to run a mile, and then you run 5 miles, and then you run 10 miles. And so as we're building that up, the crews will train for Artemis 2, then they'll train for Artemis 3, and eventually we'll add in, the surface ops capability. And so we spend quite a bit of time on, the ground side, the flight control and flight director side, figuring out how to make all of those things, available as we need them for our crew members, to be able to do their jobs and be safe. There's other layers to that, which is the vehicles themselves, how they interact with them through displays, through other procedures. And so we have to take a lot of information about the different spacecraft and distill it and communicate it. And of course, that's spread across multiple spacecraft in the Artemis architecture, just like it was in Apollo. And so you learn a lot of lessons from how we flew in the space station. People think of the space station as, one big space station, but in a lot of ways, it mirrors Apollo and Artemis in that different parts of the space station were built by different companies, different countries. And so we've had to put it together and build up that training capability and ultimately that flying capability for the crew members to be safe. The second part of your question was to ask about, doing the different things, right? So, behind me is the ISS Mission Control Room. We have in the middle of a 3-week time period where we're going to have, I think it's 14 crew members coming and going on 4 different vehicles in low Earth orbit. So, it is an amazing time to be involved in human spaceflight and a lot going on in low Earth orbit. And so, making sure we have the energy and the brain power and the time to dedicate to putting the pieces in place that we need for Artemis, the training that we mentioned for the crew members, we also have to do that for the teams on the ground, as well as being involved in the spacecraft design, the definition of requirements, and how we're going to execute that mission. And so, you could come in here and do a very focused, we'd use the word tactical execution, activity. And then, you jump over and you're kind of doing this sort of very big picture strategic, planning role. And all of that is operations. I'd say we love it because it's very different from day to day, but you do have to, be good at maybe task switching in your brain is a good way to think about it. So I think I covered all the parts of your question.
Wow, thank you. You did a great job responding to all of it because it really was a complex question. My mind was just running through all those ideas because I realized, again, you've got to keep flying astronauts in low Earth orbit, and flight control's been doing that for more than 20 years. Yet you have to prepare now for this future mission to the moon, and it's a very different kind of mission because one idea of the architecture is potentially having Gateway, right, which is orbiting the moon. And so, will Gateway be independent, or will flight control have a role in controlling Gateway?
Yeah, so flight control will have a role in operating Gateway. It won't have people on it all the time, right? So it is different than the space station today, which is continuously manned. And it's smaller in terms of overall size. So we'll have a lot of autonomy, but obviously it's a critical piece of the Artemis architecture for when, our Orion spacecraft rendezvous with Gateway, then it needs the ability to house people for a period of time, have those people then transfer over to the lunar lander. And actually, we've potentially several of the crew members up in orbit while several crew members go down to the surface of the moon in some of the missions that we've talked about, some of the architectures. So, Gateway is a little bit of everything, actually, which makes it really fun to figure out how to operate, when there are humans there, when it is not manned or doesn't have any humans on it, and when it's in a sort of quiescent time frame where it doesn't need to be working as hard, if you can think about it that way. So it's an interesting piece. We draw on all of the lessons we've learned from all of the human spaceflight programs on a daily basis. And, fundamentally, you have to sort of begin with the end in mind, right? You have all of the pieces of Artemis that need to work together in order to get, our crew members safely to the surface of the moon and home. And so I'd say we spend, the majority of the time keeping that one thing in our minds for all of the discussions and the decisions we have. It must all work together.
Well, I wanted to go back to Kjell and Steve with a question on training, because I think most everyone is aware of the Neutral Buoyancy Lab and how this is this phenomenal facility to train astronauts and prepare them for doing spacewalks. That's really kind of the design, spacewalk training for International Space Station. But is any part of that facility being adapted in any way to begin looking at potential training for a lunar mission?
Yeah, we have already started looking at lunar expeditions, if you want to call it that, lunar excursions for EVA. We have used what we call it, Z2.0, and that's a version of the evolving XEMU that we had built earlier that we're using in the NBL that allows us to basically simulate the lunar gravity. We have essentially a rock pile and a set of sand piles on the bottom of the NBL with different structures in place that allow us to look at what it would take to conduct an EVA on the moon. Obviously, we continue to tag up with the Apollo astronauts and flight directors and flight controllers as to what we can learn from those missions, and then we bring it all back, and we're already in the NBL. We also have other places, not just the NBL, that we're looking. We have a place called the Rock Yard on JSC where we will go out in essentially in shirt sleeves with a backpack and with radio communication, and conduct EVA-like geological surveys to understand what it takes to execute the exploration we need to do on the lunar surface in a very basic circumstance. But it's a lot more complicated when you start to think about the logistics of what you need to bring with you, the mass limits that you're going to have. Initially, we'll be walking, but with a low sun angle for the polar regions that we're looking at, everything will be in extreme shadow. So we did a rock yard test a month or two ago with just lights at night, and I think it was eye-opening for people to see how much you can't see. Even right next to you with a harsh shadow, you can't see what you're standing next to or what's right in front of you. So it really highlights the fact that communication, lighting, and navigation is going to be critical. So as we learn these things, using the NBL, the Rock Yard, VR Lab, assets that basically we already have, it hopefully will enable us to have a much better, more robust exploration of the lunar surface.
Amazing. What you had mentioned, the XEMU spacesuit, and I know this is something that everyone's really fascinated with, is how spacesuits are evolving over time. And I know here at Space Center Houston, we have one of the largest exhibitions of spacesuits and training suits that have been used by astronauts over time. And the original ones actually look like something from an old sci-fi movie from the 1950s. You know, it's metal and stiff. And we know that it's really difficult for astronauts to do spacewalks with a suit because you're basically wearing a spaceship on your body, right, to keep you alive while you're doing the spacewalk. How are spacesuits evolving, and do either of you have involvement in helping inform that process and the design of spacesuits?
Steve, I think you've probably got a better perspective on that.
Yeah, well, the spacesuit's evolving. One of the things that we've noted with the Apollo suits, if you watch them, as a matter of fact, somebody put together a video of all the falls of the Apollo astronauts on the lunar surface, and it was very informative. And what we learned and the mobility that are now designed into will be designed into the XEMU as it's getting built, will allow us to move much more easily and maybe even bend down and pick up a rock or get down and do activities that you could not do at all. I mentioned the Z2.0 suit that we use in the NBL, and we had a crew member who recently got out of an NBL run And her exact quote was, "Holy mobility, I never want to get in the EMU again." So, we're already making great steps that will allow us to execute. And that suit, the XEMU, is actually going to go to space station first. Next year, we're probably going to have an EVA where a crew member is going to go outside in a suit that's older than they are. It's been a workhorse for over 40 years, but it's probably time to move to another newer generation of spacesuit technology. And so Z2, the XEMU is first going to go to space station. We're going to adapt to that and then move on to the lunar surface so we can get some time on it before we take it to the moon.
Fascinating. Kjell, I'm curious if you're able to share with us, you had mentioned you're going to be part of Expedition 67. Is that correct? Yes. What are you training for Expedition 67? What are kind of the core objectives of that mission?
So Expedition 67 is going to be very similar to the work that we continue to do on the space station, and that is to leverage this amazing laboratory that we have in low Earth orbit to conduct science and research, to extend our presence in the solar system, and to improve life back here on Earth. Our astronauts, our crew members serve as subjects for life science experiments, and then we conduct science and the physics and fluid dynamics, combustion, all of those sciences, again, to continue to use the space station to its full capacity. But while we're on the space station, while we're on low Earth orbit, we continue to have our sights set on the moon and on Mars in the future. And so we want to do operational type of research that helps to inform that future exploration. And so I know that we have several partners that are again leveraging our time on the space station to do that. And it's very, very exciting to be where we are right now. Flying on new vehicles to the space station, partnering with companies and organizations that they're going to help us to get to the moon. And I just want to go back and touch a little bit on one of the earlier questions that you had. Looking at technology, Steve was just talking about technology and our next generation suits, and what it's like to have gone from the switches and buttons and panels of Apollo to where we are now with vehicles that have touch display screens. I think fundamentally, technology has been a huge part of what we do in space. We push technology as we push the boundaries of what we were trying to do. Scientists, engineers have been bending technology to help us achieve those goals. But it's really important to remember that technology is simply a tool, and not really the objective. And even as early as Apollo and earlier, that we were using technology and that engineering to do things that humans just really weren't capable of doing. And that is, responding to sensors, to input from the rocket engines and from the vehicle to maybe shut down the vehicle very early on. So automated sequences, even back in the Apollo timeframe. And we continue to do that now. So we're leveraging technology to help us become more efficient and to automate sequences that maybe the human doesn't need to be a part of. When I flew on the Soyuz rocket, we had an automated docking sequence, and during reentry, the vehicle had a lot of automated sequences during that reentry process. So that part of it is really nothing new. I think the important thing that we need to remember as we push forward, as we continue to fly in low Earth orbit in newer vehicles, and as we push towards the moon, is to continue to reinforce lessons that we learned from Apollo 13, and that is just the high degree of training and expertise and professionalism that we had in our flight crews and we had in our teammates in mission control. The knowledge and ability to think outside of the box, to be able to innovate, speaks to a huge amount of preparation for these missions. I think it also speaks to giving crew and our flight control operators the ability to to respond to things that are unexpected. And so I don't think that we sometimes talk about the failure of imagination. We have to be able to respond to those types of emergencies. And so I think that was a huge demonstration of that in Apollo 13, and just really a celebration of human ingenuity and determination and resolve to bring that crew home safely. And it's amazing to look back on that today. But we have to have that opportunity as we push forward to be able to respond to things that maybe we can't think of now. And so giving the crew members those tools, and giving our flight control operators those tools, so that we can think outside of the box, so we can innovate if the need arises to bring our crews home safely in the future as well.
That's actually a perfect segue for my next question for Holly. Something that was fascinating talking with the Apollo flight directors was they follow the NASA practice of you work through to a solution. You never give up. You always try to figure it out. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about building teams and how you give people basic training, but also latitude to continue learning while they're on the job. I know there are a lot of people who often ask me, how do I become a flight controller? So I'm curious if you could share with you, what are some of the qualities that you seek when hiring flight controllers, or how someone actually could also pursue that type of career?
Okay. When you talk about hiring flight controllers, maybe go back a little bit to, what we believe here. You had the opportunity to talk to some of the original flight directors, and of course, Jim Lovell and Fred Haise. And, one of the sayings that we have is that, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And those guys are the giants, which is amazing. And they're still, able to talk to us, every day and pass along their lessons. And so I say that because, NASA is an amazing place in that we have maintained, our culture and our expectations of our performance, what we demand of ourselves, that were started by, those giants, and we've maintained that through the years. And so, when you ask the question about what you look for in flight controllers or flight directors, our astronauts, part of it is technical capability, right? That's the easy answer. Everyone must be technically competent. We believe in technical truth. But you also have to believe in being part of a team. And you can see that in everyone's answer, no matter who you ask. The relationships matter, and they make all the difference. And, Gerry Griffin in your previous panel was talking about how for Apollo 13, they kind of had to scrap all their planning and, pivot and innovate and evolve, again, as Kjell was just talking about, and it was almost seamless. And so that is an actual skill. It's a talent. It's a, superpower that, some people have and some people don't. So when you look for flight controllers and flight directors, you start with the technical, you add on top of that the ability to communicate, but the ones that are really good just have that innate ability to, do whatever it takes and to be able to continuously pivot, evolve, innovate until you figure it out. And that's, I think, what sets us apart.
Wow, fantastic. I am really sorry to say that we are coming to the end of our time together in this conversation. And I know that with all three of you, I could talk all afternoon because it's so interesting and fascinating to hear about the work you do to advance space exploration. So I really want to say on behalf of Space Center Houston and our community, thank you for all that you do to support space exploration and continue to innovate. And we know that we all benefit as humanity because of the work that you do, and we're deeply grateful to you. And I know that you're building, as Holly said, standing on the shoulders of those who've gone before in the Apollo program. And I know from the conversations I had with gentlemen earlier today, they're all so proud of you and incredibly thrilled with the work that you're doing and the continuing legacy of NASA and space exploration. So again, thank you for joining us today. And thank you to all of our audience who are listening. And we hope that you'll be able to come in person to Space Center Houston and continue to learn more about how NASA Johnson Space Center is helping to support space exploration.
Between 1968 and 1972, America launched 9 human missions to the moon, 6 of which successfully touched down, allowing 12 men to walk on the lunar surface. NASA's next chapter of lunar exploration, called Artemis, has the task of not just going to the moon to create a long-term human presence on and around it, but also to prepare for ever more complex human missions to Mars. In short, everything we must be able to do here, we must first do here. So, what will an Artemis mission look like? Everything is designed and tested with our most important element in mind, the astronauts. This is their deep space, human-rated spacecraft called Orion, built in 3 parts. The crew module, where up to 4 astronauts will live and work throughout the flight. The service module, with life support systems for the crew and its own engine and fuel reserves. And a launch abort system, with engines capable of pulling the crew module to safety during launch should anything go wrong. To accomplish the task of launching our crew and heavy payloads, NASA is building the Space Launch System, comprising of a cargo hold, an exploration upper stage, a massive core stage, and 2 extended solid rocket boosters. Altogether, this is the world's most powerful rocket, and it exceeds the legendary Saturn V of the Apollo era in numerous ways. Sitting on the launch pad, the entire rocket, fully fueled, weighs just over 6 million pounds, 5.2 million of which is just the fuel. Once ignited, there is no stopping what comes next. All 4 RS-25 engines and the 2 solid rocket boosters come to life, thundering our crew upwards. 2 minutes after ignition, the solid rocket boosters are spent and released. 8 minutes after launch, the core stage is depleted and separated. The upper stage fires briefly, placing Orion into a parking orbit around the Earth. Here, the crew reconfigure the spacecraft and check systems to confirm everything is ready for deep space travel. With a go from mission control, the crew reignite the exploration upper stage engines to leave Earth entirely. The exact timing of this maneuver is critical to reach a speed that can escape Earth's gravitational pull, but also put Orion on a course that will intersect the moon days later. Once this burn is complete, the upper stage of the SLS is jettisoned and the crew aboard Orion coast for several days toward all that awaits them at the moon. Approaching the moon, we see the fundamental differences between Artemis and Apollo. Instead of requiring Orion to serve as an expendable lunar command module or to carry a constrained lunar lander, the Artemis missions will take advantage of a different approach, pre-staging. Everything needed for lunar missions will be positioned in advance by commercial and international partners. This includes rovers, science experiments, and human-rated systems on the surface. But it also includes a dedicated lunar station in orbit around the moon called Gateway. Here at this station, we can pre-stage a robust lunar lander and establish a strong communications relay. Designed with open standards, the Gateway can be expanded as new missions and partnerships develop, allowing multiple human missions on the moon at the same time and enabling ongoing science to be conducted even between human missions. The Gateway is also capable of adjusting its orbit to allow access to every part of the moon, something the Apollo missions could not do. But the real key in this approach is placing Gateway in a unique halo orbit to perfect the maneuvers needed for Mars missions. And with the growing list of commercial and international opportunities, Gateway is the ideal hub between Earth and all that lies beyond. Returning to our crew as they approach Gateway, the Orion must match the elliptical orbit of the station in order to successfully dock. Once on board, pre-selected crew members transfer to the lunar lander, while those assigned to Gateway remain on station. The lunar lander system itself is built for 3 unique steps: descending from the halo orbit of Gateway down to a low lunar orbit, descending from low lunar orbit to the surface, and once the lunar mission is complete, launching from the surface of the moon and ascending all the way back to the orbiting Gateway. Once back aboard the Orion spacecraft and undocked from Gateway, the crew fire their engine once to break out of the halo orbit and once again to sling the spacecraft around the moon, placing it on a multi-day trajectory back towards Earth. As they near the end of this journey, the service module is released, and the crew module is oriented heat shield first. Entering Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, the friction of air slows Orion considerably, while also subjecting it to temperatures of 5,000 degrees. With the Orion now at just 300 miles per hour, a series of parachutes uniquely tested and produced for this moment deploy, decelerating the craft to just 20 miles per hour for splashdown. With each successful mission, Artemis ushers in the next wave of men and women to explore our moon and prove that together we are ready to go beyond.